afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is 1 o'clock on Wednesday, March 9th. I'm calling this workshop to order. We have, hey, everybody's here. Excellent. Commissioner? How you doing? Good to see you. We got a busy day today. This is going to be a great day. We got the budget workshop scheduled from 1 to 3 if need be, and then we have the regularly scheduled city commission meeting at 3 o'clock with a public hearing at 6. So let's go ahead and get started. What's the druthers? Do we want to take citizen input before we have the budget presentation, or the budget presentation first and then citizen input, since we're all on the same page?
Let's do the presentation.
Do the presentation, if that's all right with anybody. How many speakers do we have, Jim? 2 speakers. Those two speakers. We're going to go ahead and get the budget presentation first, and then we'll take public comments. Sounds great, Mr. Manager. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Let me tee up the presentation. You've got your budget team in front of you, led by Robert Wiggin. We've got a presentation to walk through. The content is both for fiscal year 22, the year we're in. We're 5 months into that, and we wanted to give you an update on where we stand relative to the year so far. Also offer an early look at the development of our fiscal year 23 budget, assumptions we made, kind of the forecast that we have for revenues and expenses, and get your direction as we build that budget toward adoption this summer. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to turn it over to Robert and his
Excellent.
team.
Robert.
Thank you, City Manager.
Great to see you.
Good to see you too. Mayor, City Commission, appointed officials, members of the public, thanks for joining us. It was just a short while ago that we closed fiscal year 21 in December. We've been busy at work since that time, implementing fiscal year 22 budget. And as the City Manager mentioned, we'll give you an update on that, the progress of that budget. We also then, taking the lessons from that fiscal year 22 budget, can make some early assessment of where we might be in fiscal year 23 and get your feedback. We'll also take the opportunity to accomplish a few amendments for some capital work that's progressing well, and we want to take advantage of that the supplemental appropriation. As part of the update, the goals are listed there. We also will update you on FEMA public assistance and hurricane mitigation grant progress. And then the recommended action is to accept the first quarter budget update as presented, approve budget amendments as included in the update, and then provide any additional direction for developing the fiscal year 23 operating budget and fiscal year 23 through 27 capital budget. Worked a minute ago. There we go. As you well know, the approved fiscal year 22 operating budget is over $1 million. 774 million of that is in our operating budget. $260 million is in our capital budget. You'll note the difference between the first 4 months of financial results are reported here. We are in that 5th month, and we will know in the coming week where we are, but we forecast through year end. This sample table that we're showing you is should be familiar. It's an example of our general fund, one of our enterprise funds, Star Metro, and then an electric utility fund. In each case, we look at critical success factors, key drivers, descriptions for each of the funds, and then actions that we should take to date. I will note that all 14 funds are expected to finish the fiscal year in a balanced budget state. None of the conditions have changed since we adopted the budget. We are looking at fuel as one item to consider going forward. We do have escalators in place on an annual basis for fuel. In this case, what's happened in the last week, we'll have to look forward to see how long it might continue.
Robert, I can't imagine the escalator anticipated what we're seeing now.
You are accurate. You are correct. Yeah, no one predicted a pandemic a couple of years ago, and you know what's happening in Ukraine. Nobody predicted. Although we did hear news of it quickly. The full details of this graphic are in the agenda item. If there's any questions about the other 11 funds, but they are all as of this current quarterly update within budget.
Okay.
These regular updates enable us to make timely adjustments to the budget, as I mentioned earlier. We want to propose 3 main amendments to the fiscal year 22 budget. We're asking you to authorize the creation of 1 new position to support the Riley House in fiscal year 23. We've are also asking, and we've been directed to reserve $140,000 from the Law Enforcement Trust Fund for startup funding for the Leon County Sheriff's proposed Council on the Status of Men and Boys. And then we're asking to approve 10 capital budget amendments in underground utility, electric, gas, aviation, facilities management, and acceptance of a hazard mitigation grant program. Those amendments totaled $7.7 million. In each case, they're capital projects that are making great progress, and we want to make sure that adequate funding is there for some work that we might have waited to do or don't want to hold up development to put those in place. One other item that we've been working on since we met last, we published our online budget for fiscal year 22. Each year, we make a concerted effort to improve the public's experience with that online budget. That budget is currently available at talgov.com. I would like to point out really exciting news. In the last 90 days, we've had over 800 views of that online budget. The average time for someone to spend on the budget review on the online budget is an hour and a half. Just in the last 30 days, we've had only over 300 views, and folks are on that website for about 2 hours. So we feel really comfortable that the public is fully engaged in the process.
Robert, can you tell who those people are? I mean, are they local citizens? Are they other municipalities looking at what we're doing, or?
That's a great question.
Who they are?
I didn't get the information broken down. I would imagine we can look at the IP addresses to see whether they're local or state or national, and bring that information back.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Some of the improvements we made were in the financial summaries, in the internal service fund section of the budget. We did an updated comprehensive capital improvement section so that we could add more project information, more relationships to strategic plan objectives and initiatives. We also provided a map of the projects, a heat map, so that the public could easily see where projects are budgeted and progressing. And then we've gone further to integrate the strategic plan. If you'll bear with me for a minute, I'd like to go to the financial summaries as an example. And I think we've got someone driving to the online budget, many graphics. We've always provide the 5-year fund pro formas for revenue and expense by fund. The 14 operating funds are shown here as you scroll down through those operating funds. If you go to the general fund, for example, it gives you the detailed 5-year budget, fiscal year 21, and then the past year, and then 22 through 26. And in each case, there's a narrative that follows. You can drill down to get to the details of that pro forma. You'll notice the slider at the bottom of that pie chart allows you to look at each fiscal year respectively, and also see the numbers, the data that backs that up. Or it's visually also available to look at it in a bar chart format so that you can do a comparison across fiscal years. And the strength of this is that in each case, you can share or ask for help and communicate with budget staff. And we have a full-time person who, part of their responsibility is to take those comments and then respond back to either give further direction on where to find the information or get clarification. Thank you, Tyler. One other aspect, as always, we're available to conduct in-person tutorials or walkthroughs if anybody has questions about that online budget. Another important aspect of the fiscal year 22 budget progress and balancing is funding by our partners. We know that we can't do it alone, and so we ensure that we have responsible reserves for each fund. When we use those reserves, one of the areas that we look to is the federal and state reimbursements. We've given you frequent updates on the disaster recovery and mitigation grant funding. Pleased to report that our We've submitted nearly $860,000 in COVID-related costs for reimbursement and are working through the process with FEMA for that reimbursement. Hurricane Irma and Hermine storms are 88% or 86% reimbursed, respectively. Now, that sounds like we're near the finish line, but we really think we can get it to 90, 92%, which is unusual because in most cases, the cost sharing is at a 75% responsibility of FEMA, 12.5% responsibility for the state, and 12.5% responsibility by our own funds. But we've accessed programs that allow us to get reimbursed for 100% of debris removal in some cases, and or other allowances that come up during the disasters. Hurricane Michael reimbursement is $27.09 million that we're asking for reimbursement. We've received about $18.68 million. The gap there is a large electric project that we're working with FEMA to get reimbursed, and have all confidence based on prior submittals that we'll receive that reimbursement. The total additional expected reimbursement, the $7.2 million, we have factored into our deficiencies fund, so we're confident in that being in the deficiencies fund number. I think I've mentioned the Local Mitigation Strategy Steering Committee endorsed 2 city projects. One will support the upcoming fire station and the Community Resilience Center, and then the second project will allow for the purchase and installation of emergency power generators at 3 local pump stations. I have gas on my mind. And then I understand that there's and I don't want to steal the thunder of the legislative update, but I hear there's some great news from one of our partners also for our Tempo program. So we'll continue to pursue those. Commissioner.
Is it me, or does it seem that the reimbursements coming slow for the hurricane relief?
It is a complex process. We go through documentation. That documentation is challenging. It is our accounting records that we submit, and not only does it go through a FEMA review, but then it goes through a state review, and so it is time-consuming. I've got to say that Irma and Hermine have taken a long time, but we're seeing some acceleration in the Michael reimbursement.
Okay.
Excellent. Let me jump in with the manager here as well.
Thank you. I'd like to weigh in. And actually, Commissioner, I think on balance, is maybe difficult as this is to believe, they're going faster than we would have experienced in the past. These kinds of reimbursements take a long time, and they take years. And so anytime we have an event like this, we fully expect them to take maybe 5 years to get reimbursed. So it's not unusual. It makes it difficult. We're fortunate to be able to get reimbursed largely, but we've got to have a lot of working capital to withstand those emergencies.
Okay. That's helpful to know the expectation that it won't happen quickly, that it could take up to 5 years post-storm. Thank you.
Robert?
Thank you. One other aspect of the fiscal year 22 budget, we want to ensure that we have efficient and effective services that meet our high standards, but we acknowledge that they also must be affordable. One way that we verify that is we measure our city against 11 other cities. Presented here is the fiscal year 22 municipal cost comparison. We break it down into various areas. In this case, you're looking at a graph for residential services across 11 cities ranging from Hollywood to Tallahassee. We look at multiple areas of what a residential property owner would pay, their city property tax bill, water, sewer, electric, stormwater, and fire services. Pleased to announce that the fiscal year 22 comparison shows that the residents of Tallahassee pay the lowest total taxes, rates, and fees annually on average across those 11 communities. And you'll recall that in one aspect, we looked at water and sewer rates and made changes to those. That a lot of credit goes to the city has the lowest millage rate at 4.1 mils.
Robert, could you mention that just one more time?
Yeah.
That's important. Both aspects of that.
Sure. And we'll talk more about the fact that the city has the lowest millage rate at 4.1 mils of our 25 peer municipalities across the state. And then the 22 comparison indicates that residents of Tallahassee pay the lowest total taxes, rates, and fees annually.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
And Mr. Mayor,
Please.
really quick, I was just wondering, is the municipal cost comparison, do we adjust that in any way for medium average income or cost of living?
Yes, we do look at,
Okay.
we do look at medium home value, percent of taxable property. We look at population and square miles, and then we look at what our average usage is for each of the utility services.
Okay, thank you.
Another aspect is that looks at residential. We know that property taxes also impact, I'm getting ahead of myself. We also know that part of that measure is, in addition to property taxes, are electric utility rates. And that's what this next graph shows. That Tallahassee is the most affordable city for electric ratepayers, and that's the most significant utility expense for residents in many cases. You'll notice as we go down the graph, starting with Pensacola, Clearwater, Largo, and Hollywood, they're served by private entities. Their average rate runs about $154 per month for utility services and electric. It goes up to as high as $176 per month. As you go down the graph, we're looking at areas like West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Daytona, Pompano, also served by FP&L, and their average is also in that $154. The municipal utilities are Lakeland, or Gainesville, Orlando, and Tallahassee, and that average is about $119 per month. And so a significant difference on a monthly basis for electric rates. Tallahassee is with great planning and great work on fuel costs, is at $106 per month on average for utilities. And so again, that builds into the residential municipal cost comparison. In addition to looking at residences, we look at businesses. Businesses are very widely varied and complex, but we try to pick out a few so that we can give examples of where we are in those businesses. And so we look at a food service entity, a cosmetic service, and an office. Those are, for example, a coffee shop, a barber shop, or a real estate company. And again, in all three aspects, we are the second lowest or the lowest for providing municipal services in those categories, all structured for high value, high service. Lastly, in the municipal cost comparison is we look at the police department. We've pulled that out in prior years and continue to report on that. This shows per capita in the general fund what police department spending is and how it compares. Tallahassee has the second lowest general fund police department spending per square land mile and per capita, serving 103 square miles and approximately 196,000 people. We are only second in land area and population to Orlando, and Orlando has 119 square miles and a population of 307,000 individuals. And so again, very, very efficient, effective services. So with the, based on that fiscal year 22 balance budget, monitoring of measures and comparisons, we can begin to define some fiscal year 23 budget development concepts. We use the strategic plan priorities and impacts. We consider the economic update. We look at national and state unemployment, knowing that we're in a competitive employment market. And that we recognize the consumer price index, a measure of changes of cost of goods and services as we look at what our revenue impact is and what our expenditure results are. Guided by that city's strategic plan, on a revenue basis in the general fund, the millage rate will remain at 4.1 mills for the 7th year in a row. as overall property values increase due to new development added to the tax roll to provide additional services. Based on a rotating rate study schedule for the enterprise funds, the utility will undergo a gas rate study in the upcoming budget process. Citywide, the Finance and the Government Policy 224 requires that the city fully recover the cost for programs and services benefiting specific users, not wanting to pass that cost on to others, but also taking into consideration those financial situations for individuals so that they can participate in our Parks and Recreation programs most fully. And then on a revenue and expense basis, we'll be keeping an eye on the growth in the Consumer Price Index to assess for its impacts on revenues. So those are some of the revenue assumptions which kind of make up one aspect of the budget. Our expenditure assumptions then need to be balanced against those revenue assumptions. And one of the critical areas that we acknowledge is the investment in employee excellence. And therefore, the fiscal year 23 budget aims to increase general government salaries across the board by 5%. We're identifying a guaranteed minimum of $2,500 increase for all employees earning up to $50,000. On a weighted average, that's about a 5.5% increase in general government salaries. The other aspect of our salary investment in employee excellence is the fiscal year 23 budget funds the current terms of police and fire collective bargaining agreements, and those are in the last year of the 3-year term. We've estimated healthcare costs to increase by 5%. Information on absolute premiums for the following year are not available until August. And so if we see any changes in the market or get any early news, we'll make those changes. But for now, we've got that as a baseline in the budget. The city's contribution to each pension fund is directed by an actuarial review of the funds, and we'll continue to assess, to include that in our budget. And then we do include a 3 to 5% vacancy rate to all departments to reflect the impact and timing of expected employee turnover. Some additional operating budget beyond investment in employee excellence is operating and investment costs. Thank you, Max. The fiscal year 23 through 27 CIP invests in roads, sidewalks, utilities, technology, and public safety, site selection to maintain that financial performance metrics that we report to the rating agencies on an annual basis or on a quarterly basis. And it balances available cash, debt financing, or other grants or local federal agency funds that may be available. Our city infrastructure maintenance and construction will be updated to reflect the start of the blueprint projects and CRA commitments. Capital funding from gas and sales tax will be adjusted to reflect what we've acknowledged as American Rescue Plan Act lost revenues. And so those are programmed for the second year in a row. And then our federal infrastructure funding, we expect that to go through a competitive grant. It's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It requires us to have projects designed and shovel ready for submittal, and we're working with our departments to ensure we have those ready to submit as competitive options for funding. A few other operating investment budget assumptions is our operating costs, such as contractual services and supplies, would be held at 2022 levels. We'll evaluate in our utilities and our fee-based departments operating costs that can be adjusted by the Consumer Price Index. We want to ensure that we have rate stability and prudent fiscal oversight. We also contribute in general fund revenue to address a full range of local human service needs by our Community Human Service Partnership, the Community Development Block Grant, the Emergency Solutions Grant, and Change for Change program. This is the second year. This will be the second year of a confirmed CHSP program that gives certainty to our local human service agencies. This does not reflect then the monies that Leon County also contribute to that program, or the nearly $18 million that you identified out of American Rescue Plan funds that we have programmed in, and expect to receive the second tranche in May or June. And one of the amounts that we have budgeted in fiscal year 23 is the $2.3 million that we identified from those grants. Capital budget assumptions include some general government capital improvement appropriations. Again, these are funded with available cash prior to financing or seeking federal resources. They include the police department, the Fire Station 17, and the Community Resilience Center, the Senior Center, garage repairs for City Hall and Clayman Plaza, and roadway improvements for Railroad Avenue, Zilla Street, and Maclay Commerce, as just a handful of examples of what we're funding in the general government with that general government funding. Our entire budget, our capital budget over the 5 years is just over $1 billion. We've got $22 million in street and roadway projects scheduled, another $29 million in fiscal year 22 in technology, and $97 million in utility improvements and capital programs. With the general fund as the most constrained fund by revenues, but most critical in services like Parks and Recreation, public safety, housing and community resilience, we focus on this very early and often, and in fact, it's why we rotate rate schedules like we do, so there's most time can be spent on these general funds. So we have some preliminary estimates for the fiscal year 23 general fund. The total revenue that we're identifying, the total expenditures that we are identifying is $181.9 million in expenditures. And I've highlighted this next section because using early estimates of what revenue we expect to receive from property tax, sales tax, gas tax, state half-cent sales tax, state revenue sharing, expenditures currently exceed projected revenues by $3.5 million. $3.95 million. Immediately when we see that, we turn to revenue options to see what options we have. One area that we have recently considered, knowing that there's new commercial properties and developments in Tallahassee, city staff met with the Leon County Property Appraiser office in February so that we could understand the timing and impacts of property tax collection and revenue estimates. Just for some background, property taxes in fiscal year 22 are $51.7 million in revenue. That's about 30% of the general fund budget of over $171.6 million. We've kept the same millage rate for the past 6 years, of course, and then that taxable value in fiscal year in 2021 for the 22 budget increased by 3.7% and added about just under $2 million in revenues to the general fund budget. As we prepare the fiscal year 23 budget, we're estimating about 4.5% in growth, or an additional $3 million in fiscal year 22 and 23 revenue, and that's considered in the when we report on the nearly $4 million deficit. Now, we would expect that additional properties that come on board, depending upon the timing, would bring us additional property tax revenues. After meeting with the property appraiser and being aware of Florida statutes, there are protections, and we all recall that the Save Our Homes is in place for homesteaded properties and caps property taxes at CPI or 3%. Prior years, CPI has been 1.5% to 1.7%. This will be the first year that we hit that cap of 3%. And then commercial properties and non-homesteaded properties also have a cap of 10%. And so there are protections there. But we do know that new development should pay its fair share of taxes on its market value. And those taxes are needed, as you well know, for police and Parks and Recreation, Housing and Human Services. We provided an example here of a new commercial property the one that's substantially complete by January 2nd of 2022, the property owner will not pay taxes for another 22 months. So 12 months will pass until they're added to the tax roll, and the first property tax bill would then be paid October 1st of 2023, an additional 10 months after that. I do need to advance that slide. Thank you. That is why we met with the property tax appraiser to understand what projects, where they were in the timing, when we could expect to see any growth in our property taxes. Using this example, from substantial completion to the first day taxes are paid, a new project that's valued at $20 million over 22 months will forego about $150,000 in property taxes. And so we're going to continue to meet with the property appraiser to understand when properties are coming on the tax rolls so that we can better predict what property taxes we will see in the near future. Next steps for the budget. We know that with that deficit, we need to continue to update property tax revenue. We'll get final numbers in June and July. We'll follow up on state revenue estimates that are also issued in July so we can update the general fund. We'll continue to monitor potential impacts from CPI. We'll review the salary enhancements that have been proposed for general plan employees, and we'll review capital progress and planning to update the 5-year capital improvement plan. We've got a workshop in May to receive additional feedback, and the proposed budget is presented in the July workshop. For reference, these are the commission meeting dates that we have scheduled, and then the topics that we'll address as we go through this budget preparation process. We would ask that you accept the first quarter budget update as presented, approve of budget amendments as they've been presented, and then provide any additional direction for development of the fiscal year 23 budget and 23 through 27 capital budget.
Thank you, Robert. Before we move to public comment, any other final questions? And of course, we'll come back and have more questions and discussion as a commission. All right, Jim.
Quick question.
Sure, Mayor Pro Tem.
Robert, approximately what percentage of our property, given that we're a government town, is not on the tax roll?
Yeah, so that's about 45% of our property is not on the tax roll. And so percent of taxable property in the city is 55% of our property is there. And so we account for that when we're looking at the municipal cost comparison also, because that is a huge factor.
Exactly. And so that factors into the comparisons, the municipal cost comparisons, because I could imagine that those cities that we're being compared to don't have that much of their taxable property off the tax roll. So it even enhances, in my mind, what we're doing as a city here in Tallahassee with what we've got to work with. Thank you.
Sure. Jim Cook, walk us through public comment, please.
Thank you, Mayor. We had 2, now we're up to 5, but if there are others who wish to speak, they can fill out a form like this. They were on the table just outside. Each speaker will have, as customary, 3 minutes for remarks. Speakers can come to the podium right here, and if you'll give your name and address to begin, I'll give you a heads up when you're getting close to 3 minutes. And our first speaker is Lauren Perlman, followed by Kate McFall.
Thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. I'm Lauren Perlman, 6349 Fitz Lane, Tallahassee, Florida. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners, and City Manager. Thank you for having me again today. I'm here to support the budget request for Tallahassee Animal Services. I know several of you from prior years. It's been a little while since I've been here, but I just wanted to state the critical need right now at Tallahassee Animal Services at the shelter, with the number of animals that are in care every day and all that the staff there are doing. It really has become critical to care for those community animals. I don't know how many of you have pets of your own, animals in your homes, excuse me, but it truly is a quality of life, and that's why I am so passionate about this. These pets teach us and our children responsibility and compassion. They become our best friends, and I think it is so important, and I'm so grateful for everything that you do to support the animals that are in the care of Tallahassee Animal Services. So thank you. I look forward to meeting with each of you in the future and talking more about the need. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker.
Kate McFall, and then we'll hear from Robin Hassler Thompson.
Great. Your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Kate McFall, 1206 Walton Drive, Tallahassee. Thank you. Good afternoon. I appreciate you taking a few minutes, and I'll be brief, just to echo the support for animal services. But first, thank you for many of you who have met with me and talked with me and who value and support animal services. It's super important, and thank you personally for your time and for your efforts on that. A few animal care specialists are being asked for, a vet tech, and 2 OPS positions to be converted to full-time. Using the national guidelines, any of them, whether it's NACA, the National Animal Control, University of Wisconsin, or UC Davis, any of those guidelines, our shelter staff level is low. And as a regular volunteer there, I see it firsthand, especially considering the increase in shelter population and the increase in programs, whether they're shelter programs, independent, or some of the programs that work in partnership with the Animal Shelter Foundation. It has been several years since Animal Services has requested additional staff, and the need has never been greater. So thank you. Appreciate your support and hope that you will support these budget requests for animal services. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Robin Hassler Thompson, and then next will be Kayla Norris Barber.
Great. Thank you. Your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Robin Hassler Thompson, and the address of my agency is 851 East Park Avenue in Tallahassee, Florida. I have a handout. I was hoping I could give some information to you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. It's wonderful to be with you again today. I'm here to ask your support for a very important training that's actually already taking place here in Tallahassee called STAC Pro. As many of you know, the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center is an agency here local to address the issues of sex and labor trafficking. We do this in 2 ways. We provide direct support and assistance to people who are sex trafficked and labor trafficked, and provide that support through direct assistance and aid. And we also have a mission to provide community education. And I will tell you, as recent as last night, I had someone come up to me and actually say in a meeting with many people who are very involved in the community, "You mean human trafficking is happening here in Leon County in Tallahassee?" And I was surprised, but it brought home to me how important what I'm asking you about today is to fund and support. Last July, the Leon County Commission funded STAC Pro, which is the business training that you see described in front of you today. We know it's so important because businesses and all workplaces, profit, nonprofit, are the eyes and ears of the community. They see people coming in and out all the time. They might see a trafficker bringing say a sex trafficking victim into a convenience store to use the restroom and to get supplies. They might see somebody who is at a hotel being forced to work and actually, a victim of forced labor and labor trafficking. And what we need to do, frankly, is to let everybody know what this looks like, how to recognize and respond safely. Sometimes you might think the best thing to do would be to immediately say something to that victim, "I can get you help," but that could be the most dangerous thing to say. So what we wanted to do and what we've done and started with this program is to train all of our businesses here in Tallahassee. The county funded it last July, as I said, at an initial amount that has resulted in the creation of it. And like many projects I'm sure you're familiar with, when you get started, you realize there are things that pop up that you hadn't anticipated. And we've done a lot to this training to sort of build it out, but have discovered there are unanticipated costs. And also, as much as I could tell from all the projects and all the things that we've done here locally in our great city and county, a partnership between the city and county for projects like this is very important, and that was certainly recognized by Leon County. And Mr. Mayor, I know we've been in touch with your office a lot, and I know you've been very supportive of this as well.
You have about 20 seconds.
And we'll be using this funding wisely to leverage what the county's already done to prevent and intervene in human trafficking. It's a wise investment. It fits right into the resilience of this community, to strengthening our business sector, to protecting them from liability, as well as to supporting the public and creating safe spaces. So we're asking, we have proposal information that's already been circulated to your budget office, and would ask for your favorable look at this. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker.
Next is Kayla Norris Barber, and then Stanley Sims.
Your name and address for the record, please.
Kayla Norris Barber, 527 West Brevard Street. My comments will focus on the strategic plan priority updates, in particular, the impact on poverty. We're doing a good job of counting things like dollars spent, services provided, number of program participants. What we're not doing is measuring results of these strategies. While tempo, which is really the bright spot, it mentions some outcome measures. It has pointed to the number of participants who've obtained a GED and the number of participants employed. But we don't know if those folks are earning a living wage. We must begin to monitor economic indicators of economically distressed neighborhoods to determine if we're moving the needle on poverty. So here's some vital economically distressed community economic indicators that we should monitor. Now, we probably don't collect data on some of these, but I think we should. Gross domestic product, say gross domestic product of, say, Frenchtown or Bonds or South City. Labor force participation, unemployment rates, household incomes, and home ownership. I think if we would begin to monitor some of those economic indicators of those economically distressed neighborhoods over time, then we can determine whether we're moving the needle on impacts on poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Stanley Sims. That's the last speaker I have for this workshop, Mayor.
Great. Name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. I'm Stanley Sims at 1320 Avondale Way. I would like to proudly stand with the animal people. I'm late to this meeting today because we rescued, y'all know, my dog Prince. And he will not go and poop in the rain. And you really have to coerce him to go out to do his business in the rain. So I stand in support of the shelter and ask them to see if they can do any training about how to get them to go outside in the rain. I want to thank Mr. Robert Wignam. He has not answered all of my questions, but some. And as the way I say that is because I'm trying to be strategic here and change my approach. So to lose my point to what Mr. Barber is saying is, I'm ecstatic, and what really pushed me farther to endorse this report and the great work that your staff has done and the reduced costs of utility costs was really illuminated by Commissioner Richardson's point with the amount of non-tax property we have here. That moved a lot of my suspicions. But here's some things that are still cloudy with me, which leads me in the manipulation of data. When you start talking about small businesses, you cherry and distinctly pick barbershops, those kinds of things. But if you look from 38,000 square feet, that's beautiful. But if you come down 3,800 square feet, what would a barbershop cost you to operate downtown? Because we don't have a black barbershop. What would that retail cost you to come downtown? And so as I see part of Mr. Barber's point, I see part of your point, drives me to my last final point to my good friend, Mr. Robert. We need to rethink how we invest in communities of color. And the first step of that reinvestment of how we invest in community, what may work downtown may not work in Frenchtown. And I'm not
20 seconds.
Mr. Barber has corrected me that Frenchtown is downtown, but these are the type of kind of feedbacks that we're looking for that will move us to gaining better relationships and building credibility. My last thought is, it's really challenging to trust you guys when you see your city manager, Dan Pennegree, and other co-workers on a plane in New York.
You're
Is
at
that
10 minutes.
funded by FSU boosters?
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Appreciate it. Any other public comment?
None from me.
Excellent. Let's open it up for discussion. The recommended action is option number 1, which is to accept the report, the budget amendments, and provide direction on the fiscal year proposed 23 budget. I got Commissioner Porter with her hand up first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple of questions. And first, I wanted to say I really appreciated the presentation. I have the utmost, every time we go through this, I have the utmost confidence in y'all, and I feel so secure with our budget in your hands. So I want to thank you for your diligent work. With the ARPA, and that won't be a continuing, reimbursement or support that we'll receive. Do you have any idea what percentage of the loss we've incurred because of COVID that we will recoup? And do you feel like we need to take any additional steps to be okay when that funding, when that support runs out?
No, we've monitored where we are with half-cent sales tax, state revenue sharing. We do see it tick up this year. We don't see it returning to the levels had we continued through the pandemic at the level that we were going. So the ARPA funds are absolutely necessary to fill that gap so we continue to provide services. It is foremost in our mind also, though, that when that goes away, how do we continue to provide the services? And so we don't see any warning signs yet that uptick will not continue, so that we will be there in fiscal year 24 and 25 where we'll need to make any changes. But we'll report that as soon as possible if we do see that.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment that I had, I love kudos for the online budget peer review. I love going on that thing, and so thank you for going through that process and having those high standards. I did notice that as I was going through it, at least maybe after this meeting, if we were waiting to confirm these dates, I think some of the dates need to be updated on there for this cycle. Another question is sort of based on, so I know that we don't yet have a formal draft proposed budget, but do we have something that I can look at that's a line item draft for what we can expect? I mean, I can assume that it will look a lot like last year's but do we have that?
We don't have it at this early stage, but
Okay.
I do expect when we meet in May that we will have that detail.
Okay, great. And then just a few things are not necessarily questions. Well, one more question. How do we factor in for grants that we expect to receive in the future? This is just a general question. How do y'all approach that? Because I know sometimes, we vote on that, on accepting grants all the time. I know all our departments are actively looking for grants. How do we factor that in?
Well, primarily, we show revenue sources for capital projects. A few of those capital projects then have federal funding as the designation, and that's to ensure that we're not put in a position of supplanting the dollars that were intended to replace that grant. And so that's how we indicate that. We identify federal funding, which then becomes ultimately the application that we go through with the IIRJ or the ARPA funding.
Okay, great, thank you. My last comments are just mostly, I guess, to my colleagues and Mr. City Manager, are just questions and comments about things that I would like us to consider and comment, maybe some of these things are already included or are being considered. And I know all of these questions probably don't have answers right now, but especially with some of the speakers, I just wanted to follow up. Where are we at with Stack Pro? Is that something that is that it has a line item or has gone through that process, or something that we need to move forward? We would have to take additional steps to include?
We connected the individuals with the police department
Okay.
to talk through what current services are provided, how this might fit into their toolbox, so to speak. And those conversations have happened.
Okay.
Now, the reaction was that they needed more information in order to feel comfortable that it wasn't a duplication of service. And so I think those conversations will have to continue.
Okay, thank you. I know that during our retreat, there were discussions about expanding tempo. Is that something that has been considered in this budget?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. We've had, obviously I see with the police and fire and all of that, we had some of the staff from TPD who are forensic staff come to us at a meeting asking for pay raises. I know that we're planning on pay raises across the board and all of that. Is that something that's been considered in this budget that you know of?
I'll look to Chief
Okay.
Revel. I believe that he moved forward with, Cynthia can answer this question.
Thank you. I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot. These all just came to my mind as we were having this discussion.
Ms. Barber?
Yes, Commissioners, the staff adjustments that the chief needs to make, he's able to make those within his existing budget. Is that correct, Chief? We've already taken care of those that needed to be handled.
Okay, thank you. And then the last few things are things that, have been expressed before that I would like to see us just consider. So these are just me throwing it out there. I still would like to see, and I'm not trying to revisit this conversation, but a $15 minimum wage across the board. One thing that is very personal to me would be consideration of protected bike lanes, either across the city or in places where we know have heavy traffic. I'm a cyclist, I've got a scooter, so that's something that's important to me personally and others in our community. In the budget, talking about the success of the team project with, the partnership with mental health services and police department, I would love to see if there is a need to expand that and give more staff support, since it's been almost a year since we launched that, where we are at with that. I made this comment at our housing workshop, and I haven't had any conversations with Abena or those folks, but whether we can include an additional position for housing, since it is such a priority for us. And I know just personally, my office, I feel like we're social workers sometimes, and that's something that I would like to see us consider. And then the last thing is just, coming out of COVID, seeing the impact of COVID on our children, on our youth, on our families. We had discussions a few meetings ago about theater programming, the arts programming. I would love to see a priority on expanding, meeting the needs for our parks and recreation, to have the programming that our community has had and needs moving forward. I think that we see that in the reports about the anatomy of the homicide and the increasing crime, the importance of that in our quality of life. So those are just some of my thoughts going through this. Thank you so much.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I first of all want to highly commend our budget staff for the work that you have done in the 6 years that I've been here almost on the commission. I mean, for me, it's been a budget for dummies, because when I came, I knew nothing about city budgets or local government budgets other than what the information I got as a school board member. It took me half of my term as a state representative to learn the state budget. And so I was about on my way out by the time I got that budget figured out. But it has been so easy to understand the city budget because of the way you all present it to us and the quality of the work that you do. I hope you have already started talking about a succession plan, Raul. I know you're going to be leaving us through retirement, but the kind of staff that you have, we need to make sure we're able to continue that staff. And I think that some of the things that we've heard today in terms of how we compare to other cities, in terms of the cost for our residents, the quality of services that we provide, and given the fact that 55% of our property is non-taxed, that says a whole lot for how we operate as a city and how efficiently we operate as a city and have maintained that same millage rate of 4.1 for the last 6 years. And I'm sorry that the media is not here. I hope the people who are listening hear this because it's very significant for how this city has been run over the past, 6 years that I've been here. It's been that way. And we should be proud of that. And we should let everyone know what we're doing here in Tallahassee. And that's why I asked the question about who was going to that website, because it very well could be that other municipalities around the state and indeed the country are looking at what Tallahassee is doing in that regard. And I'm very proud of that and to be a part of the leadership team that has made that occur. And so again, thank you all for that. I don't have any questions about where we are right now in terms of the budget. I'm looking forward to our May meeting because we certainly have to be mindful of that deficit that you talked about, Robert, and making sure that at the end of the fiscal year, we're able to provide a balanced budget, which of course we're required to do. And I'm sure you and your staff will keep us abreast of where we are and what adjustments we need to make, if any, so that we can have that balanced budget at the end of the year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
And
You want to make a motion?
yeah, that's what I was about to
Staff
end up with.
recommendation?
I'd like to make a motion that we accept staff recommendation on the budget update and the amendments to the budget that have been requested.
Mayor Pro Tem has properly made the motion for staff recommendation of option number 1, seconded by Commissioner Porter. Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too want to just pile on and say, great job, budget staff. I wholeheartedly support the amendments and recommendations that you provided. I think that the Riley House especially has, they have skin in the game. They brought skin to the game. They agreed to fund this position through the fiscal year. And it's always good when you have folks who are willing to work with you to get to the end game. And so I appreciate that. I also still on board with supporting animal services and making sure that we do what we can to make sure that our companions, our four-legged companions are taken care of because, as we get younger, yes, we're counting on them to help keep us young. So we want to make sure we support them. I want to speak also to a little bit to what Mr. Barber said about economic indicators. I don't know what it would take to do that, but I agree that we probably do need to look at, if we're not already doing it, I suspect we're already doing it in some level, looking at what those economic indicators are because we are tracking the impact on poverty. But I would also want to include that for those programs that we fund, we also need to collect that information from those organizations as well, because the reason that we provide that funding is to have that type of impact. So on the agencies and entrepreneurs and other folks that we provide funding to, if we're not already receiving some type of reporting on how it is impacting us economically and our other strategic plans, parts of the strategic plan, we need to make sure we have that information as well. And if we have folks who need assistance in collecting that data, then help us get that for them so that we can have a holistic picture of what's going on, because many times we think we're doing a good job by giving, awarding money, but then we've got to look back and see what's happening with it. And that was one of my criticisms prior to coming to the commission. There was a commissioner who made a statement that everybody's getting their fair share. Throwing good money at a bad problem and turning your head does not get us where we need to be. So if we're going to give money, we need to make sure we're getting the data back to indicate what that money is doing, because if that program is not being effective, then we don't need to continue putting money in that direction, or there may need to be some changes made to make sure that we're hitting all cylinders. So I want to say that as well. Also want to say to our employees that I saw in the state budget that they're following our lead, and now state employees are scheduled to get a 5-point-something% raise.
5.3.
And so still the city of Tallahassee is leading, and we're still far ahead of that. And so if the getting is not good enough at the state, come on over to the city, we'll treat you well. We'll treat you well. So thank you all for always considering that we value our employees, and we want to make sure that we keep them and treat them well, because they're the ones who really make this city run, make it operate, and they are economic drivers as well, because if they have money, we spend it and keep our economy going. So again, thank you, Robert, Raul, and the whole team, and everyone, city manager and deputy city manager, all of y'all that make all of this work. I'm glad I don't stay up at night wondering what's happening, because I know you guys got it. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor? Just
Sure, on point.
Yes, very much on point. Good point, Commissioner Williams-Cox, in terms of, what we're doing physically for our employees, because in my briefing with the city manager, he mentioned that, this is an employee market, if you will. And so we've got to make sure that we continue to be competitive in terms of our salary and benefits so that we can keep our employees, because there are others out there that, they might offer them an extra 50 cents an hour in pay, and that looks good for somebody who needs that extra income. And so, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we've got to make sure that we look out for our employees at every level and make sure that they are in a position where they can take care of themselves and a family. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Mello, you good? Okay. I'm going to support the motion on the table. Great presentation, as always. Y'all do an amazing job, award-winning, recognized. Certainly do appreciate it. A couple of comments as well. I want to thank our friends from Supporting Animal Services for coming out. It's a great service, and you're absolutely correct. We have challenges that we need to address, and thank you for continuously coming out to advocate on behalf of the animals. I want to thank Robin for reminding us the importance as well of Stack Pro, and appreciate the great work that you're doing in our community. I also was the one that brought it up at the retreat, and yes, I'm a huge fan of tempo, and as we move forward, and I know, Robert, you don't have anything in writing yet, and the May meeting is the one where we really kind of start digging in. And I also recognize and appreciate the challenges that the Mayor Pro Tem did reemphasize with the deficits, and we're at the beginning of this. But I think the Tempo program truly works in our community, and as we discussed at the workshop, any possible financial expansion, I think is worth the conversation to have. The one conversation that we haven't had, my last point here, and it's a big one, and it's a very important one to me, is we have constantly made curbing gun violence in our community a top priority. We have talked about this year in and year out. I think it's also time that we have serious conversations about the financial commitment to programs to help curb gun violence in our community. This is not a new conversation. Ms. Barber, I give you credit. In 2016, you wrote the first report on gun violence. The Sheriff's Anatomy of a Homicide complements and restates exactly the findings that you had. The previous commission at one point almost considered a national program to come in, and at the last minute decided not to move forward. I know that there are, and I think we're all aware that there's big conversations taking place in the community, especially within the faith-based community. And I think that there are going to be specific asks of the elected officials, both the city and the county, specifically when we talk about gun violence disruption programs on the streets. And so in anticipation of these requests and in anticipation and knowing that we have to address these issues, on top of what I personally think is the great work of the police department, on top of the great work of Tempo and other great community partners out there, I would like us to keep in mind up to $1 million appropriations for gun violence disruption programs. And I'm here to tell you that it's not a one-time ask. I think that we should look at a 5-year operating window to make sure that it's sustainable funding. We can't have a program come in and think in 1 year we're done. At this point, this is just the hypothetical 30,000-foot view. But I know that you're hearing the same conversations that I am hearing, and I think that if we are going to seriously entertain any ask, this also comes with the procurement side. This comes with an RFP. This is many different departments, Mr. Manager, that we've had conversations with of how we would move forward. But I just want to formally get it on the radar because I do anticipate these conversations. Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I agree with you that it is a conversation that we need to have. I also want to keep in mind that we're dealing with 4.1 mil, and so we are not going to be able to fund everything, but we are absolutely looking for community partners. And I think that I saw the news last night about the faith-based community, what was being said. I invite the faith-based community and other community partners to join us in this funding, because even when you're applying for grants, you have to have matching funding. And so if the conversation is that we want to look at $1 million, if that's the totality, and I think it's right to ask that community partners come forward with at least 20%, which is 25%, which is what is the normal ask for grants, from my experience, because we can't fix it all by ourselves. Again, we can't just throw good money at a problem and turn our heads. We've got to make sure that everyone has skin in the game, because a bullet doesn't know who is going in until it's in there. And so it's not just happening in some parts of town, it's happening all over town. And it's not even just happening here, it's happening, folks are coming in and folks are going out. And in retaliation, a lot of things are happening. So I think it's a great idea, but we're gonna need everybody. And pardon the pun, we're gonna need all to be in, financially, physically, emotionally, mentally. So I would support what you're saying, but say we need some folks to come in and bring some skin to the game to help us. Otherwise, we're stretching 4.1 mil to do some things that, if you stretch a rubber band so far, it pops. And so we've got to be able to meet the need, meet the moment with all resources in the community. So I support it.
Excellent. Before I call for the motion, I do have one question in regards to the property appraiser's office, which is interesting because we really don't have these conversations. With the property appraiser who's been in office for a couple of years, looking back, how has the assumptions out of that office actually matched up with the realities? Usually when we begin this process, are they conservative assumptions that are coming out? Are they a little bit more liberal assumptions that come out? How, if we look at years past of where we are right now and what we're hearing coming out of the property appraiser's office versus the actuals, what can history tell us?
It's an excellent question, Mayor. In our conversation with the property appraiser, they brought 4 or 5 individuals to talk about their process. I think it was very instructive what they walked us through. A lot of guidance by state statute on timing. The appraisal portion of what they do, again, is depending upon the contract that they enter into and then their appraisers and their approach. I was reading an article this morning that talked about how the curve works on appraisals across the spectrum. Is there hesitation to appraise high a house that costs a lot at a higher rate than another community, there's less turnover in those communities. And so
Correct.
there's less possibility for, for comps that are used in the appraisal service. I don't have a good answer for that. We haven't looked at it over time, but we want to continue those conversations with the property appraiser so that we are aware of when those things that are in place, when the timing happens, so we're precise about when we measure that. And then also as a reminder that it's very important to us, the property tax is very important to us whenever it does happen and how it's done.
Robert, I would love to request that you, for my own personal benefit, if we could, you and the city manager, myself and my team, spend some time together. I would like to be more educated on the current property appraiser's process of assessing properties, the assumptions that are made versus the actuals that come out, so I can have a better understanding, because my colleagues are correct. When we talk about assumptions of a $4.5 million or a $4.3 million deficit, how does that play into the property appraiser's process? I have actually heard a couple of different opinions on how the current property appraiser assesses the properties at this point, and so I would like to educate myself more. With that, there's a motion on the table by the mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
It's
sir.
appropriate. You asked about tempo. I want to make sure in this conversation, because there's been a couple of questions, and Robert provided the comment about the tempo program and what we've assumed in the budget. And you're going to hear this at your afternoon meeting. Some of the funding we're using for tempo above and beyond what the city's appropriating is coming from the state. And you'll hear today, so I'm going to share a little good news, which does grow the tempo program, but it doesn't do it with the native funds of the city. Both the House and the Senate have agreed, and I think we feel pretty comfortable now that we're actually going to receive $500,000. The last updates you heard, we were very excited to receive $250,000. That grew to $375,000. There's been so much goodwill developed by the program, it's going to $500,000. So it does expand, if approved, it does expand the capacity of the tempo program. And we were going to share that this afternoon, but I didn't want to let that go without saying, because I think it is germane to this discussion. I appreciate you allowing me to add that.
Thank you. Motion on the table for staff recommendation made by the Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Commissioner Porter. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, passes unanimously. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be back in, about 45 minutes for the City Commission meeting at 3 o'clock.